Please welcome David Rubenstein, President of the Economic Club of Washington, D.C.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in today. This is our 10th virtual signature event of our 35th season. Alex Gorsky has a very interesting background. He's from the Midwest. He went to West Point, graduated there, and then served in the military, rising to be a captain after 6 years of military service. He then left and joined a healthcare subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson in the marketing area, worked there for a number of years, and then ultimately worked his way up to become the chairman and chief executive officer in the year 2012. So he's now in his 8th year as chairman and CEO. And I should point out that how large this company is. It has a market value of about $395 billion, which would make it, I believe, the 10th largest company in the United States in terms of market value. And it's the largest healthcare company, not only in the United States, but in the world. And in the time that Alex has been the CEO, in these 8 years, its market cap has gone up by 122%, and its stock has gone up by 130-some%. So my big regret is I didn't buy the stock when Alex became the CEO, but I hope to correct that in the future sometime. So Alex's company has 130,000 employees. So Alex, thank you very much for doing this. And I appreciate your giving us time. I know everybody under the sun wants your time these days because of a little thing called COVID-19. So thanks for agreeing to do this time with us.
Well, hey, David, it's a real pleasure to be with you here this morning, and I really look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, what I haven't said, and Alex is being very polite, in other forums, I've interviewed him a few times recently, and so he is polite to not pointing out that I'm probably going to be asking him some of the same questions he's heard before, but he will act so surprised by these questions that he will act like he's never heard them before, right?
Absolutely, David.
Okay, so are you concerned about the virus resurgence? And do you think that the virus resurgence puts us in a position where we are in risk of having a worse situation than we've had already? And do you think we're better prepared for this situation than we were 6 months ago?
Well, David, yes, I am concerned about this virus resurgence, and I think all of us should be. And while we look, many experts in the field had predicted that we would see a spread and a surge as we entered the fall months, we're clearly seeing that manifesting itself in a very significant way. And in fact, just yesterday, and I think it's important for all of us to, as we go through the statistics and the figures and the other big issues, this is very personal. And I actually lost a good friend yesterday that had been an influence in my life in Michigan, due to COVID-19. So, while I think a lot of progress has been made since the March and April timeframe, and I think we're in a different situation as it relates to our understanding of the virus, the number of testing procedures that are being done, the protocols, the processes that are being used in hospitals. I think the doctors, the nurses, the hospital workers are frankly doing just a tremendous job in ensuring that patients have a much better outcome now than they would have 7 or 8 months ago. I think the numbers themselves demonstrate that this is a very pernicious, this is a very virulent kind of virus. And as people have gone back indoors, in some cases, as we just suffered some fatigue from, being sequestered in small bubbles, you might say, that it has started to spread. And look, I guess the positive news is that in terms of the correlation that we're seeing directly with mortality and fatalities, it has not manifested itself at quite the same level. But I think it's, it's way too early to read too much into that, because I think the next 3 to 4 to 5 months are going to be challenging. We're going to have to navigate our way through. We're going to have to, again, use all the things that we know, like such as masking, social distancing, contact tracing, and do everything we can to control the virus until, we're able to get more therapeutics and some of these vaccines out and widely available to get to the other side.
So, Alex, do you get asked every 15 minutes or is it every 30 minutes when their vaccine is going to be available?
It's about every 30 seconds or every 5 minutes at the very least, David.
And what is the answer?
Well, the short answer would be not soon enough. But look, I am incredibly proud of the work that not only the scientists, the researchers, our engineers and employees at Johnson & Johnson. And by the way, over the past 9 months, while we've got about 140,000 employees, approximately 40,000 of them have been going to work every day. And those are the people in the manufacturing facilities, in the research laboratories, making sure that we can get work done, not only around COVID-19, but around all of our other products as well. And I think it's also a great reflection, however, on the entire pharmaceutical industry and the biopharmaceutical industry in seeing the number of really novel approaches. I think there's more than 200 different vaccines, for example, in development, 300 therapeutics. I think 10 of those are in late stage development. You've heard the news recently, of course, out of Pfizer and Moderna that's very encouraging and certainly suggestive that when we attack the corona or the COVID-19 virus with the right kind of approach, that neutralizing antibodies are produced, and that this virus is susceptible to the body's immune response. Now, we still have a lot more to learn, a lot more data, but we're encouraged by what we've seen thus far.
Now, the vaccine that you have been developing was seen as a one-shot vaccine. In other words, the others have a booster shot. So you have to get them twice. Now, you also announced recently, I believe, that you're doing a booster shot as well as an alternative. So which do you think will come to market first, the one-shot one or the two-shot one for Johnson & Johnson?
Well, we're going to have to find out more through some of the testing. When we've used this in the past, we used it in both formats, 1 and 2 shots. And we're going to have to find more information. The early data that we were able to generate, both preclinically as well as in the clinic in our phase 1 trial, suggested that we do have a robust response. And that is, again, how the body responds in producing neutralizing antibodies with one shot. We're testing that dose as we speak now in a very large clinical phase 3 trial that will involve up to 60,000 patients. And in parallel, we're also looking at a 2-dose approach where you would get a second booster shot. And we're trying to determine, where would we be able to identify the best balance of efficacy, safety, and of course, it also has an impact on the number of vaccine shots that would be available, particularly during the course of 2021. So those are the different things that are being evaluated. And we think ultimately it would have a very significant impact on compliance and just the administrative challenge of vaccinating so many people with a single dose versus 2 doses.
So let's talk about the administrative challenge of actually getting these out to, let's say, initially 330 million Americans, not counting all the other people around the world that you also want to help. So who is going to distribute these vaccines? Who's going to actually give the injection? How are you going to do that?
Well, David, you're right. While the biology, the chemistry, the engineering required to discover and to develop the vaccines is certainly complex, we've never vaccinated 330 million people in the United States, as you just pointed out, let alone over 7 billion around the world. So the logistic, the administrative, the distribution challenge associated with that is no small feat. And we've also been working with government officials, with healthcare officials around the world to do everything we can to coordinate and simplify this process. And here too, I'm proud of the way that the industry has worked collectively in a pro-competitive way, but trying to make sure that we could adopt similar processes, for example, to work with the United States government. Many of the viewers here on this program may have seen the 60 Minutes show a few weeks ago that talked about Operation Warp Speed and what's been put in place here in the United States. I think from our perspective, what we're seeing is good collaboration between the federal government, between the existing private distribution system that's in place with other vaccines and other therapeutics, and the coordination with local governments, local healthcare systems, and perhaps even community groups to ultimately ensure that we get, broad-based access and distribution for these. And I'm encouraged by a lot of the work that I'm seeing, David. But there's still more work clearly that needs to be done, particularly on the kind of timeline and the scale that we're talking about.
Is it the U.S. government or the vaccine manufacturers who will decide who gets it first? Presumably healthcare workers, people that are older, or people that have healthcare conditions. But who's actually going to decide you get it first or you can't get it now?
Well, those will be decisions made by the CDC and other governmental agencies, and fundamentally, we'll make sure the vaccines are ready for distribution, and then utilizing an ethical framework. For example, considering healthcare workers, first responders, other people directly in harm's way to the virus will likely be prioritized. Could also be age related, because we know, for example, that people above the age of 60, 65 have a much more significant probability of being severely impacted by this virus than younger patients. And so those guidelines will be determined ultimately, by those agencies in the government. And then we use again, a public-private partnership between the private distribution system and some of the people, for example, the U.S. military, who will be helping to coordinate all that.
What about people over 65 who are in the private equity world? Will they be getting special treatment?
I think they're last in line based upon what I just recently heard, David.
Right. So the CEOs of major pharmaceutical manufacturers are caught between a difficult situation now where the transition from one administration to another seems to be going, let's say, slowly, to use a nice word. Is that causing any problems for you or any of the other manufacturers that you can talk about?
I haven't seen signs of that so far. Look, throughout this process, I know those of us at Johnson & Johnson, but I also believe with many of my colleagues as well, we've been talking with both administrations. We've been working closely and emphasizing that it's absolutely critical that we maintain consistency, continuity through this period, particularly when you think about this transition is going to be taking place while we're likely looking at where the FDA could be reviewing an emergency use authorization for several of these vaccines, while this distribution infrastructure is being put into place, and while we're facing, a very challenging period regarding the virus. And actually, one additional factor is when there could be a more limited availability just based upon the production rate that these things can be produced at. And so, having that be as seamless as it can be is going to be important.
Let's talk about testing for a moment. Many people would say that we don't have enough testing equipment. We don't have enough testing available to people. Do you think that that is fair criticism, that we haven't had enough tests for people? And do you see any way to improve testing? And I think, if I have it right, you're not in the testing business so much as other companies, or am I wrong?
Correct. We're not directly in the testing business, but of course, we work with a lot of healthcare systems regarding those tests. We use those tests with our own employees, for example, in certain areas. Look, I think that we've seen dramatic improvement. I mean, to go from several thousand tests per day that we saw at the very beginning to over 1 million per day is, I think, a great achievement. However, clearly we have more work to do, particularly as we learn. As you see greater and greater spread geographically, the number of tests that are being required has increased quite dramatically. The timing of the test remains a challenge, because it's not only when you get your test, but it's what you do with that information and how soon can you get it. How do you know when to quarantine, when to not quarantine? There are tremendous consequences, for example, not only of having a positive test, certainly in your behavior, but also if you have a false positive, in the impact that can have not only on you, but on your family. So I still think there's clearly work that needs to be done in that area.
Oh, I've had a couple COVID tests, all negative so far, and they put a kind of cotton swab up my nose all the way, seemed in my brain, it seemed like. And if you're the head of Johnson & Johnson, can you get something that's less painful than that?
No, I got the same one, David. I've had multiple tests myself. Unfortunately, they've been negative. I've had different variants, as you said. I've had the nasal swab. I've had the pinprick. And look, I think one of the things that we're finding is that just as with the virus, there's no silver bullet. Even with testing, it's going to take multiple approaches. I mean, we're going to have, some that can be done on a very large basis, hopefully some that we can have done in our homes in the not too distant future. And I think it will take a combination of all these ultimately to help us really get our hands around it.
At the beginning of the pandemic, hospitals seemed to be unable to deal with the problems, the surge of patients that came in part because they didn't have adequate PPE. And turns out we're very dependent on China for that. Do you think that we're now in better shape? At least the hospitals have adequate supplies. And are you involved in the production of some of those supplies for the hospitals?
Yeah, I think hospitals are in a much better place than they were previously. Look, I think an overall theme, because I know economists are always interested in themes supported by data, that we've learned through this is, the maniacal focus that we've had, not only in business, but even in our healthcare systems on efficiency and effectiveness. Clearly, we're going to have to transition that more to one, I believe, around resiliency, of sustainability, and being able to manage through these kind of surges. And I think, today, whether it's PPE, gloves, masks, gowns, hospitals by and large are in a much better position than they were originally. I think the sources for those, we've had a lot of conversation about. And I think it has started a different conversation. And while, many aspects of commerce, of business in our country and around the world have benefited from integrated global supply chains, clearly, if 95% of a certain good that's absolutely critical, for example, in treating patients is sourced from, one particular location, that's an issue that we're going to have to relook. And so I think it's going to fundamentally require all of us, not only in the healthcare system, but more broadly along business, to think, how do we build in better business continuity? How do we build in the right level of redundancy to ensure that we're never, ever caught on the short end of something like this, as we were back in January and February?
So among the products that you make that consumers know are Band-Aids, Q-tips, Tylenol, but you can't sell enough Q-tips, Band-Aids, and Tylenol to be 400 billion of revenue. So where does your revenue come from? What are your biggest products?
Well, you're right. People know us mostly for our consumer brand names that you just mentioned, Listerine, Neutrogena, for example. But in fact, that makes up about 20% of Johnson & Johnson's global sales. About 55% of our sales come from our pharmaceutical division. And there we're the largest pharmaceutical company in the United States, among the top 3 or 4 in the world. We've got products in infectious disease, things for HIV, in addition to the vaccines, but also immunology, areas such as oncology for prostate cancer, for lymphoma, and cardiovascular disease. And then, of course, we also have a very large and successful medical device division. We make everything from sutures to endocutters to energy instruments to hemostats that help stop bleeding intraoperatively, contact lenses, of course, as well as hips, knees, shoulders, and other orthopedic instruments.
Okay, so let's suppose you go to somebody's house and you cut yourself, and they bring out something to put it on, and it's not a Band-Aid, it's some other kind of product at some other manufacturer. Do you not wear the Band-Aid if it's not from Johnson & Johnson? How do you deal with those problems?
Well, I always try to carry my Johnson & Johnson first aid kit with me. It's not too far away, so that I'm prepared for that. But of course, I always try to use our products, and I have had some issues once in a biking accident where I cut myself, where I had to ensure that they were putting in our Ethicon sutures, for example, to get just the right effect.
Okay, so let's talk about how Johnson & Johnson did this. When was Johnson & Johnson started, and what enabled it to grow to be such a large company relative to all the other healthcare companies in the world?
Well, it's got a great tradition and a great history, and I think it's really representative more broadly of technology, of innovation, and frankly of grit in the way businesses have been built in our country. And the start of it goes back actually to the 1880s, David. There were 3 brothers going to school up in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. A couple of them were pharmacists. And they basically opened up a journal one day and saw that the World's Fair was going to be taking place down in Philadelphia. And that a surgeon by the name of Lister was going to be doing a presentation on aseptic procedures for surgery. And again, if you go back to the 1880s and you think about the way surgery was done at that time, it was a pretty gruesome process where there wasn't nearly the appreciation for germs and how disease and infections were actually spread. If you think back to the Civil War, most of those deaths were caused by infections versus the wounds themselves. And so this Dr. Lister came up with an idea and a philosophy based upon his research that said, well, if we keep the surgical field sterile, if we can keep out germs, then we will have a better outcome. And so the brothers went down to Philadelphia, saw this and thought, well, what if we actually, came up with a way to sterilize gauze? And so then they worked on several processes, and surgical gauze became, in fact, the very first Johnson & Johnson product. And from there, they found, in fact, one of the wives of one of the brothers who cut herself in the kitchen, as you had mentioned with me, said, well, what if I put a piece of tape on that? And the next thing you know, you have a Band-Aid. And so it started there and then grew through the years, and was predominantly a consumer and medical device company until the 1950s and 60s. And then it got into the pharmaceutical field, and it's continued to evolve. And look, our fundamental philosophy is we try to go where there's unmet medical need,
Right.
where we can innovate and apply technology, great clinical development, and then commercialize it on a global basis. And as a result of that, David, today we approximate that we touch about 1.2 billion people every day use our products. And we have more than $25 billion platforms across the Johnson & Johnson portfolio.
So how come it's not Johnson and Johnson and Johnson? They're three brothers. Did one of them get left out or something?
Well, as you know, with a lot of family businesses, they rarely succeed the way ours have. But one of the brothers did decide to take a different direction, so that's why it's Johnson & Johnson.
Let's talk about your own background. As I pointed out in the introduction, you have, I would say, an unusual background for somebody who's heading a major pharmaceutical medical company. Nothing wrong with it, but you went to the West Point. You do have an MBA from Wharton, I should have mentioned. But how did you, let's talk about your growing up. Where did you grow up?
Well, David, originally I grew up in Kansas City, Kansas. My grandparents were all immigrants from Eastern Europe, and they came to this country, look, with the hope for a better life. And on one side of my family, they opened up grocery stores. On the other side, they went to work in meatpacking factories. And that's how the family got started here.
So you were born in and grew up in Kansas City, Kansas. That's pretty American. Did you ultimately move to Michigan? Is that where you moved to? Or?
Yes, my father was he quit college, and he enlisted in the Army during the Korean War. Ended up becoming an officer, served his country there, and my mother did not want him to stay in, so he decided to get out, and he ended up joining Gerber Products and started a career with them, first of all as a sales representative. And then we later moved to Michigan. And so the family moved to Michigan when I was about 12 years old, to a very small rural community outside of Grand Rapids and Muskegon. And that's where I finished school and graduated from high school.
So when you graduated from high school, when you were in high school, you said, I want to go to the military academy, or did your parents encourage you to go, or what prompted you to go to West Point? Nothing wrong with it, but why did you decide to do that?
Well, it actually started when I was in about sixth grade. And, I was very fortunate to be in a family where I guess I thought it was normal that every parent would put their Army uniform on one weekend a month and go off to, serve their country in the reserves. And so that the example that my father set, being both in the Army Reserve as well as having, his civilian job, was a pretty high bar and expectation. And so I always had a bit of a line of sight to what was going on in the military and the Army, and that intrigued me. And then when I was in about sixth grade, I remember visiting a family friend who had a son that went to West Point, and opening up a yearbook, and I was immediately captivated by the entire ethos of the academy of duty, honor, country, of being challenged not only academically but physically from a leadership perspective. And I basically knew from sixth grade that that's where I wanted to go to school. I wrote a journal entry at that date, and fortunately, things worked out the way that they did.
As you went, when you got to West Point, did you say, I made a mistake? They're cutting my hair off. It's a lot more work than I thought. Or do you say, this is exactly what I wanted?
Well, it was very different then than it is today. My first day stepping foot on West Point was the day that I actually, joined the academy as a freshman, as a plebe. You didn't get a chance to do near as much, work, but, I had done my study. I had tried to prepare myself as much as possible. But, I must say that when I went there, it was bigger than life for a kid from, that time, again, early on, Kansas City, rural Michigan, everything about it, the history, when you saw the statues of people like Eisenhower, like MacArthur, when you had a chance to experience all the challenges that were being thrown at you, it was something that actually was incredibly motivating to me. And while, look, there were some days that were incredibly long and really hard, and where I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to make it, I knew deep down that it was the right place for me, and one that would make me so much better as a person and as a leader and prepare for the future.
Okay, so you were in the military, you rose up to be a captain. Why did you say, I want to wait and become a general? Why did you decide to leave?
Well, I love my time in the Army. I can remember graduating at 22. Here I was, I got a chance to, go to a very remote nuclear detachment in northern Greece, where I was directly responsible for US soldiers, for Greek soldiers. Where else can you get that kind of leadership experience? And not only were you responsible for their training and the weapon systems that we had, but you had to handle the life situations that just came up. And to be put into that situation at such an early age, I think was probably the best laboratory for leadership than I could have ever imagined. I then came back to the United States and I served in the 7th Infantry Division, the Light Division. We were a rapid deployment force, got a chance to travel many different places around the world. And again, have some pretty significant responsibility. And so I was at a point where I was either going to have to go on to another assignment, which likely would have been back to graduate school, and then even back to the academy to be an instructor, or to some other assignment that would have incurred an additional commitment. And so that's when I started thinking, well, do I want to stay in the military for another, what could be 10 years or 15 years, or do I want to make a transition out now? And after thinking it through, and by the way, it was very difficult because I loved the Army. I felt a good reputation, had worked hard, but I decided to make the transition then.
So you left the Army and you decided not to go into private equity. I don't know why you decided not to do that, but we certainly would have welcomed you into the industry. But what led you into Johnson & Johnson, or the subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson?
Well, look, there were a number of things. I was always interested in healthcare. I had, thought growing up at different times of, should I go to medical school? Would that be something, a passion that I would want to pursue? I had a number of family friends that were involved. My wife was a nurse. I had other family members that were actually in healthcare. I saw it clearly as an area that was a nice mix of not only being able to help people and actually, make a difference for the world, but also involved a lot of high technology. Both, I think, areas that, I found very motivating, especially when I was thinking about a career. And then, of course, at a company like Johnson & Johnson, just the culture there, too, a very credo-based culture was something that attracted me, especially having, worked in the military only prior to that time, where, issues around honesty and integrity and duty, honor, country are very important. Being able to transfer that over into a company that shared similar values was really important to me.
So did you say you were in your late 20s, I guess, when the time you joined? Did you say, you know what, I can be the CEO of Johnson & Johnson? It won't take that long. Did you have that aspiration, or that wasn't on your radar screen then?
It was beyond my wildest dream, David. I mean, I started as a sales representative. It was part of a development program. But what I would say is, that time being with customers was so important. Really understanding what the healthcare, how it made the healthcare system operate, how doctors, how nurses made different decisions. And you just can't do that vicariously. Being in there every day, working with them, trying to support them and help them was a great education and really a foundation for the rest of my career. And, then after that, I had different positions in sales management and marketing management. But it wasn't until much, much later that I ever thought that this kind of a dream could be a possibility for somebody like me.
So your father, did he tell you to join Johnson & Johnson? What did he say when you were leaving the military?
He probably would have preferred for me to stay in the military. Several of my brothers, I have 5 brothers and sisters, 6 children in all, and 2 of my other brothers also served their country as officers. And my father, I don't think what I relayed earlier, that once he got out of the Army, he did stay in the reserves and rose to the rank of 2-star general. So while he was doing his job at Gerber, he also was very successful in the reserves, and he found it to be just a great challenge and a great other venue for him to perform, to give back. And so that was very appealing to him. And certainly that, was translated to me. But he was also very supportive when I made my decision to leave and to join Johnson & Johnson, particularly a company like we are.
So he was a two-star general. Did he tell you what to do as a two-star general, or you were only a captain? Or did you say, look, I don't have to listen to you anymore?
Well, one of the best parts of my job, in addition to being able to help patients and consumers and do some of the things we do, is that I was able to share it in some ways with my father. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year, just before COVID-19. But every year he would come to our annual shareholder meeting, and 30 minutes before it started, he'd be in one of the front rows reading through the proxy statement. And as soon as I was done with the meeting, he would come over and say, Alex, you did a great job, but here's a couple of things you could have done better.
Okay. So if you're the CEO of a healthcare company, I assume you got to be in reasonable shape, because you can't be overweight and be the CEO of a healthcare company or something like that. That'd be my assumption. So you always been interested in fitness, and you spend a lot of time now, particularly trying to be fit because you're the CEO of Johnson & Johnson.
Well, you're right. I have always been interested in fitness, and look, some of that started even before I went to West Point, but certainly when I was there, my time in the military. But look, I think there's a lot of different ways to be successful. But as the world's largest, most diverse healthcare company in the world, we also have an aspiration to be the healthiest company in the world. And I'm very fortunate. Several of my predecessors really put a stake in the ground long before the kind of wellness and health programs were broadly offered by industry, and they made that a real responsibility and commitment at Johnson & Johnson. And so we have tried to accelerate that significantly. We fundamentally believe that, look, when you're in your best health, and that doesn't mean everyone's got to run a marathon or a triathlon or something like that, but take care of yourself. When you eat the right way, when you sleep the right way, when you can better manage your stress, you can better manage the travel schedule that's associated, and fundamentally you can be a better employee, you can be a better leader. And so we have extensive programs around the company that really help employees to be their best. And I think as a result of that, when we think about the engagement that we have, our healthcare costs are actually lower, and our outcomes are better. And frankly, we think it sets a great example, particularly in the healthcare industry, let alone all of industry, about the importance of health and its direct relationship to what we do every day.
I've seen pictures of you in triathlons. And so when you're doing a triathlon and they're, let's say, Johnson & Johnson employees, do they try to beat you, or do they kind of let you get ahead of them?
No, we've got some great triathletes in Johnson & Johnson. But I love, in fact, when I travel, I will frequently take time to do a workout class with some of our employees. And I think it also hopefully brings a level of approachability, brings a level of humanity that, hey, we are all working together towards a common cause, whether it's at a spin class in the morning or whether it's on a research and development project in the afternoon. Yeah, it's something we have a lot of fun with in the company.
You've publicly said before that you had an artificial hip, I think. Is that right?
I do.
Okay. So you make artificial hips at Johnson & Johnson through your subsidiaries. Is it Smith and Nephew, or?
No, it's Synthes, DePuy Synthes.
Okay. So you have that. So when they are going to give you that operation, do you tell them you have to use your artificial hip, or you said you can use the competitor's artificial hip, or you didn't care?
Well, of course, in this case, I was going to have our artificial hip.
Okay.
And, look, I was blessed not only to have a great hip, but I had a great surgeon and I had a great outcome. And I attribute all that. I mean, think back about 15 years ago, David, when you'd go in for a hip replacement, you might be in the hospital for 3 or 4 days. It might take you several weeks. I mean, even previous to that, people would be in traction. When I went in for my hip surgery, I literally was walking in the recovery room within an hour. I was discharged within 24 hours. And on day 3, I was able to walk a mile with a cane, and my wife. And within about a week to 10 days, I was pretty much back to my, regular regimen.
Not sure I can walk a mile even now, but okay. So let me ask you, if let's suppose President-elect Biden is watching this and he says, this is a man who's a military leader, the CEO of Johnson & Johnson. This man needs to come into my cabinet. I need to have him be in the government again. So what would you say to the President-elect about serving in the government?
Well, look, I think there's no higher calling, and I would hope that President-elect Biden is watching this today. It's a very distinguished panel and a great group of leaders and people, and look, I think that times like these have demonstrated that we all need to understand healthcare probably a little bit better, and in fact, I think a big change out of all this is the way we think about healthcare is going to be different, and how we think about certainly global public healthcare policy is going to be critical. We think about the impact that healthcare can have on our economy. When we think about even the impact that it can have on national security and in other areas. So I think there are a few areas in our society, in our government, that aren't touched in some way. I even find it interesting now, more and more CEOs are thinking, I'm going to have to get a chief medical officer put into place as I think about running my business forward. So whether it's at a kind of a high strategic level or at a very personal level, healthcare is going to touch all of us at one point in our life or another. And I certainly look forward to working, with the new administration on ways to make it even better.
Okay, suppose he said, all right, I understand you don't want to go in the government. You got a pretty good job. You're doing a good thing for the country now. But how can I improve the Affordable Care Act? Can I make it better? What would you tell him he could do? One or two things that might make it better?
Sure. Well, look, I think the Affordable Care Act has done some good things. The fact that it covers pre-existing conditions was certainly a very important step. But as with anything, I think there are still tweaks we can make. So one thing that I would do is we still have to continue to ensure that we move to an outcomes-based reimbursement system, one that's not only predicated upon what particular procedure you got at any given time, but what was the outcome like associated with that procedure. Now, that's not easy. It can be challenging, but I think when we move to that, it will cause more integration overall, and again, a more holistic focus on that outcome versus just the various components, of trying to get there. So I think that's number one. Two, I think it's about how do we better combine and utilize data and information in making day-to-day healthcare decisions. One of the things that we found from this pandemic, David, is compared to 1918 and the Spanish flu, we would never know exactly where we are without the ability to quickly aggregate data, analyze it, and then use that to adjust course, make changes. The way we've been able to develop a vaccine so quickly. So I think that's another area where data utilization can be a very important not only of improving outcomes, improving experiences for patients, but also ensuring that we create the best value for each dollar that we're investing in healthcare along the way.
So let me ask you about the situation with respect to leadership. You have been a leader in the military. Now you rose up to be the CEO. What do you think are the qualities that takes to be a good leader? Is it hard work, intelligence, persuading people to follow you? What would you say is responsible for your rise up, with all modesty aside? What enabled you to be a leader and rise up to this leadership position?
Well, David, what I always look for in leaders, it starts first with character. And I think that's a sine qua non of leadership. It certainly needs to be so for business, but government, anywhere. So whether it's honesty, integrity, in everything that we're going, especially given the expectations that all of us have and that frankly should be expected of us. I think another critical component today is the ability to learn. And to constantly reinvent and regenerate your education. If you just look back when you and I graduated from school, the half-life of our degree was probably 20 years, let's say. Not much was going to change. I have an engineering degree, and so force was going to equal mass times acceleration for a long time. But you think about how quickly technology is changing that curve. Today, I think your education is more a license to learn. And so the ability to quickly adapt, to learn, to be curious, and constantly in that kind of learning mode. And then look, the third thing for me is grit. It's resiliency. It's the ability to make a decision, to fail at times, to be able to pick yourself up, to move ahead, to overcome odds, to some weeks make it to Friday, other times inspire people to lead others to accomplish things that they couldn't maybe do on their own. So I think certainly those are the kind of qualities that I look for in leaders.
So talk about COVID for a moment in the sense of how you ran this gigantic company when COVID hit. Were you working remotely from home? Were your employees? And do you think your employees will come back to their offices in the way that they used to 5 days a week?
Well, at first, the number one thing we needed to do when we found out that, look, we were heading towards a serious situation, was to take care of the safety of our employees. And especially as the world's largest healthcare company, we needed to take the right steps. And so we immediately worked with our infectious disease experts who, looked at the guidelines that were being put out around the world. And in our case, as I mentioned earlier, of our 140,000 employees, about 100,000 have worked remotely, while 40,000, we put very solid protocols in place, protective equipment to help them continuing to produce the products, products, services, and other things that we're delivering, as well as in our laboratories. The others, we had to support them to be able to work from home. And look, I'm really proud of the way that we've been able to respond. You would think a large 140,000 person company is bureaucratic, it's heavy, it's slow. And if I look at the speed, the agility that we've been able to demonstrate on Zoom calls, on maintaining a high emphasis on quality and compliance in things like closing our quarter, but also on product development. But at times being able to eliminate some of the unnecessary bureaucracy or the layers of review and management that we required for before, just sometimes due to rituals or habit. So I'm encouraged. I don't think we're ever going to go back to exactly the way we worked before. I hope not. That'd be a terrible thing. I think it will be a new normal. I do feel working proximally near your employees is important long-term for the culture, for the character of an organization, and in our case, for innovation and for partnering and for collaboration, where we can have, for example, a pharmaceutical researcher sit next to a medical device engineer and come up with a way of, hey, we can develop this next new therapeutic, utilizing an endoluminal approach to the lung, but we're going to apply an immuno-oncology agent on the end. That's hard to do vis-a-vis just a Zoom if you're not there together. So I do think we're still going to have to work together, but it will be in a new way.
Now, this is no doubt the toughest year you've had as CEO, I assume, of the 8 years you've done. I assume you're looking forward to next year. But how long do you think it'll be before you can go back to more normal kind of work pace and way of living? Is that a year away, you think?
Well, look, I'll give you the economist answer since it's the economics club. It depends. But I think if I look at all the data right now, as I said at the very beginning, I do think we need to take the next several months very seriously and follow good protocols and really do everything we can to keep this virus from spreading. I'm hopeful that as we move through the spring of next year, that not only warmer weather when people can move back outdoors for a large part of the country, as we learn more about the virus, as we get more therapeutics approved, more distribution on the vaccines to the middle of next year to the back end of next year, that we'll see a return to a more, what I'd call, new normal way of working together.
When you go out, do you wear a mask?
I do.
And you think there's anything wrong with wearing a mask?
No, I would encourage everybody to wear a mask. Look, masks aren't perfect, but we should not let perfect be the enemy of good. We've got to be doing everything we can. So whether it's masking, washing our hands, social distancing, and look, I think we all have to role model that. And those are the most important steps. While, look, I am very excited about these new technologies, some of these very fundamental things that we do, and we've got to make sure they're part of our daily rituals, daily habits, can make a huge difference in the arc of this virus.
Alex, I want to thank you for a very interesting conversation. I'm going to go out and buy some Band-Aids and some Q-tips and some Tylenol, just to thank you for the job you're doing. And I think those products are pretty good. So thanks very much for what you're doing. I hope the vaccine will come forward soon. I hope that you'll put private equity people near the front of the line, but if not, in an appropriate place. Okay?
Well, David, thank you so much. Great conversation as always.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.